I'm Dana Perino, and this is Perino On Politics.
With the stock market taking a plunge and the clock ticking for Vice President Harris to announce her running mate, this election is about to get a whole lot more complicated. Welcome to Perino on Politics, where we give you everything you need to know from a 30,000-foot view of this week in politics. You may have noticed I'm not Dana Perino. I'm Mary Katharine Ham, guest hosting for her. Joining me this week with a look at how today's issues will color the presidential race is Republican strategist and co-founder of South and Hill Strategies, Colin Reed. Welcome, Colin. How are you doing?
Mary Katharine, such a treat to be here. So nice to chat with you. Looking forward to diving in.
All right. Well, we always start with sort of a theory of the race. What do we know? I've been thinking this through, and I think there's a couple possibilities, right? Number one, that we've sort of settled back into a pre-debate situation where this is a competitive race with Trump a little ahead, a little more in swing states. Second scenario, this is simply a sugar high that we're experiencing. Third scenario, this is a sugar high that will continue to surge because there's such a short time frame here. And last but not least, a competitive race with sort of a black swan international or market-based incident happening sort of as we speak, which could change things in who knows what way. So where are you on this?
You know, that's a great way to start. It's a fascinating question. I think I'll throw one more into the mix before we dissect the three that you outlined, which is it's the middle of summer, and a lot of people are paying attention to a lot of things other than politics right now.
Right.
I was in North Carolina this weekend, and I was just thinking about that, seeing a lot of people on vacation with their kids, doing a lot of other things than paying attention to politics. But that's no fun. So let's dive into your scenarios. Look, I think where I come down on that question is we are back to the pre-debate norm, the pre-Joe Biden collapse, the pre-Atlanta fiasco, whatever you want to call it. And we've got a tight race in a really closely divided election in a divided nation. And it's going to come down to those 7 states that we're going to talk about. And I do think maybe we can talk about this. I think sometimes people view them all as a monolith, and they're not. They're, of course, different states, different people, different electorates, different issues. But ultimately, one of the reasons I was drawn to politics is there's not a lot of math involved. You just have to get a majority of voters, or in the case of running for president, a majority of the electoral votes. And it seems pretty clear that those 7 states, and those 7 states being Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, they've got the keys to the kingdom. And the polls have tightened. Vice President Harris has had a nice few weeks. We've got a long way to go. And there's 91 days. And if we've learned anything over the last month or two, what's that old saying where there's decades where nothing happens and there's weeks where decades happen? So we got a long way to go.
That is what we're dealing with now. One of the things that struck me when Harris entered the race is right before she entered the race, when I was at the RNC, I noted, hey, look, this is an easier race for Trump simply because he has several paths to 270, and they have one. Biden had one, right? Where you had to get all those blue wall states, which have been tricky for him in different ways. The entire Rust Belt had to belong to him, or else he's in trouble. Now, it does seem to me that Harris has not only a little enthusiasm bump, which is real, and we'll see how long it lasts, but she might have the ability to expand the map into other possibilities for the Democratic ticket. Where do you think she could be most likely to do that?
Well, first of all, I thought all those predictions about Trump winning in New Jersey or New York or Hampshire or Virginia, I think I heard you describe it as fool's gold. Couldn't agree more. That was always a reach then. I think right now that there's the old saying that things are never as good or as bad as they seem. I think Vice President Harris certainly has more pliable paths than President Biden. I think she takes the states like Virginia, probably puts them back in the red and blue category. I think states like Georgia and North Carolina, they probably should trend red. I know there's a lot to talk about what happened in Georgia this weekend and what should happen and what does happen. And then there's states like Arizona and Nevada. I've always been suspicious of these huge Republican leads in the state of Nevada because it's a blue state. but it's also a very transient state. People move in, people move out. People were destroyed by COVID. We know the Democrats got it wrong on COVID with the benefit of time. So look, all of this comes down to whether or not she is able to perform as a candidate. And we don't know that yet. We just don't, because she hasn't. She's got the wind at her back. She's got the momentum. The press isn't pushing her on these issues that she's seemingly walking away from these big ticket items day in and day out. It's untenable to go 91 days without giving a major interview or a press conference. Even the mainstream media will push her on that eventually. But right now, she's just a big unknown, whereas Donald Trump is, for better or worse, he's a no.
Well, and she was able to get away with this for several weeks, not answering any questions, repudiating her positions from the past via spokesperson and via press release, because she was the news of the day, right? But I think this week we have different news of the day. And I can't say much about this because I'm not an economic forecaster, but we have problems in the market right now is the generous way to put it. 1,000 points lost in the Dow, NASDAQ falling in significant ways. And again, we don't know exactly where this is going to end up, but it does seem to me that that is reality intruding on the sugar high, and that she will have to face questions about, hey, is this Bidenomics? Is this what you're answering for? Or what are we doing here? What's the plan?
Before we get to that, one point you just hit on, wasn't it incredible? Friday, 6 o'clock, middle of summer, spokesman says, by the way, no longer support a fracking ban. And the press just says, cool, that sounds great to us. And there was no scrutiny. There was no follow-up. She still hasn't addressed it. I mean, fracking, major issue in a state like Pennsylvania. We're going to talk about oil and gas industry employs 500,000 jobs in the people in the state of Pennsylvania. The margin will be much smaller than that, I assure you, whoever wins it. And she's able to just say, this thing that would have totally decimated your industry that I said I supported, I no longer do, and no one pushes her to it. She'll have to answer for it, and she will.
But by the way, one of the people very good at pushing on this issue is Dave McCormick, who is the Republican Senate candidate in Pennsylvania, and he has been all over that talking point and educating people about her position on that.
I agree. And it's helped his campaign immensely. He was one of the first ones out of the gate with that ad. And it's impactful, and it's especially impactful in places like that where energy is not just something we talk about in the esoterical theory. Do we support EVs or do we not? It's like, well, they also employ my family and they help put food on our table, and it's a job in addition to all the wonderful things energy does. But to answer your original question about the economy and what we're going through right now, I mean, I remember working in the McCain campaign many years ago, 2008. Hopefully not what we're going through right now, but there was a time when we've been talking about hope and change from Obama, and Senator McCain was making the case for the continuation of the war in Iraq, and we need to see that through. And then boom, all of a sudden the Dow plummets, Lehman Brothers collapses, and the entire landscape shifted. Frankly, economics was neither of those two candidates' sweet spots, neither Senator Obama nor Senator McCain. But what's that, the old saying, like life's what happens when you're busy making other plans, and they had to kind of address it. And it became a referendum on the economy. Now, look, polling shows, I don't know there's been too much with Harris v. Trump, but Biden v. Trump, President Trump had the advantage on economic issues. People remember 2018, 2019. They remember $2 gasoline. They didn't know what inflation was because it was just a textbook economic term, not this painful experience at the grocery store. And then President Biden got in office. And then we learned all these things, supply chains, and why Christmas gifts weren't going to be here, and why gas was $5 a gallon. So logic would say that former President Trump should have the advantage when it comes to the economy. He did against President Biden, and it's up to him to make that case against the Biden-Harris economic record, against Bidenomics, and remind people, by the way, that Vice President Harris was proudly the tie-breaking vote for the Inflation Reduction Act, which, as we know, 2 years later, did not do what it said it was going to do. So there's a treasure trove for him to go through there to work with.
Well, and on the economy front, I think some of this is, I don't feel like there was an economic or a political reckoning, frankly, for COVID restrictions, right? You can't unplug the world's economy and then try to plug it back in and think everything's going to be fine. I don't think that's really settled out. And we've sort of been getting by the skin of our teeth for a bit. Again, this is like not an expert's opinion, but just a gut feeling. And one of the places, as you note, where there was a COVID reckoning was Nevada. where there was a Republican governor elected as sort of the backlash to this. Virginia is another place where Republican Glenn Youngkin was elected, largely due to some suburban voting based on schools being closed by Democrats for a very long time. So I am interested in that state because Trump has never won it. It is a blue state. It is a multiracial, young, working class electorate, largely in the large cities of that state. But it seems to me he does have one compelling economic message in particular, which is that no taxes on tips, which I think is interesting just for being easily digestible and centered right on the kind of electorate that might be in that state.
And it speaks to the shifting sands in the Republican Party in terms of who's attracted to their message. And it's their political realignment happening right now. And it cuts into that. And Donald Trump has always been his best, that is, been able to expand the tent, welcome others in, as opposed to shrinking the tent. I think that's one of the reasons that the Democratic Party has had challenges in places like Iowa or Ohio, where they've become so hyper-focused on these identity politics. People think, well, I'm none of these groups that you're catering for. I guess there's no place for me. And the Republican Party at its best is saying, come on over here. We're a big tent. We've got a place for you. We don't have to agree on everything, but we do kind of agree on these core principles. And you're right. I mean, the accountability that it did not happen for what happened, the decision making during COVID, is a real shame and an untold story. I guess it did happen in some of these states in the ballot box, but that's one where Vice President Harris she's going to have to own all of these decisions that President Biden made. And this is why vice presidents tend to not do so well at presidential candidates, is they own, for better or worse, the agendas of their bosses. And I mean, Vice President George H.W. Bush in 1980 is one of the rare exceptions. Most of these vice presidents just don't get elected in their own right because America says, we've done that. Let's try something else.
Well, and it is interesting that she's coming out of this administration directly into this 3-month race. And the pitch is sort of like, look, I'm the change you've been waiting for. And it's like, well, that's an interesting pitch. And it does, obviously, she's a different candidate. She feels very different on the trail. She's able to be on the trail, which Biden was unable to be. Let's talk about, but it's like sort of nonsensical. And yet, when you see her in Georgia, you see excitement for her. And then we had Trump in Georgia this week as well, which I would like to talk a little bit about the contrast in those two events. Now, Trump made news, and I want to talk about what else was in that rally as well. Trump made news going after very popular Republican Governor Brian Kemp, because he and Kemp have been on different pages about 2020 and the elections there. Such different pages that Trump promoted a primary candidate against Kemp, who Kemp whooped and then went on to whoop, these are technical terms, Stacey Abrams in the state of Georgia. He has a 60+% approval rating in the state at times, I believe currently. And yet Trump went after him for this personal disagreement that they have. What's your take on what that does to the state of Georgia, especially when Kamala's down there making arguments?
Governor Kemp has offered a roadmap for other Republicans to follow. He is the governor, the two-term governor of a diverse, growing, just a state that has the kinds of coalitions that Republicans are going to need to build to compete in the 21st century. He's got the approval ratings to show it. He's got the battle scars to show it. As you noted, he defeated that primary challenge by 50 points. It wasn't close whatsoever. And then he beat Stacey Abrams, who was seen as hard to believe now, but a couple of years ago was seen as a rising Democratic star by 8 points in a kind of a tough year for Republicans. Not kind of a tough year, a tough year for Republicans. By the way, he got COVID right. Georgia was one of the first states to reopen. He took a lot of heat for that at the time. It wasn't easy, but with the benefit of hindsight, he has shown us and other Republicans how to do it. So look, Brian Kemp deserves all the credit he's got. And he also won. I took a look before we hopped on here. He won in 2022 by 300,000 votes. Donald Trump lost the state of Georgia in 2020 by about 11,000 votes. So there's a big chunk of people there who don't really like what Democrats have to offer, but didn't really like what Donald Trump was selling either. So Governor Kemp should be brought into the tent. And by the way, he endorsed Donald Trump after all this and was willing to do what he could do to help. And it made clear he doesn't want Vice President Harris to become President Harris. So Mary Katharine, there's an old cliche in politics, but some of these cliches kind of work for a reason. Campaigns need to be about the future, not the past. And if we are talking about events from 4 years ago, we will not. And we have so many other things to discuss. And the events of this weekend, that rally, the headlines coming out of it, if you're the Trump campaign, the mainstream media is against you. You give them an inch, they'll take a mile. You can spend 85% of your time talking about dissecting President Harris's record, but you spend any time other than that, it's not going to get covered. So that's the reality. And look, whoever this presidential race becomes a referendum on will lose. And it's up to each of these combatants to keep the focus on the other one, because that's what America wants right now. They just want something normal. They just want this chaos to end. And making the other candidate untenable, unviable, and unelectable is going to be the keys to electoral success.
I think you're right. And for both candidates, anticipating easily anticipated pitfalls is part of the game, no matter who you are. And I know there are fewer for Harris, who has largely a press corps on her side, but that's part of being a Republican candidate for president, and you got to be ready for it. Let's take a break real quick, and we'll be back with our second segment. We are back with Perino On Politics. I'm here with Colin Reed. Colin, I know you've been writing for FoxNews.com, and you have some thoughts on the VP race, which is about the Veep stakes is about to be over, I think, as of soon. But what's your take on what Harris should be doing in her play, picking a VP candidate?
Well, maybe it'll shock you to learn. No Democrats are asking me for my opinion on this, but to me, this is really easy. You've got the governor, extremely popular, of the state you have to win in Pennsylvania. It's 19 electoral votes. There's really to our earlier discussion, there's really no path forward for Vice President Harris without Pennsylvania in her column. Governor there is Josh Shapiro, is a guy who's respected across the aisle. He's expanded his appeal beyond just his party base, and she can't win the White House without Pennsylvania. And yet, if you look at everything, seemed to be trending this weekend toward a Shapiro pick. And then yet some of the loudest and most extreme voices in the Democratic coalition started expressing their unhappiness. Bernie Sanders went ahead and endorsed Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, one of the other picks. Some of the union guys said that Governor Shapiro is insufficiently loyal to their causes. John Fetterman, of all people, as apparently, if you believe the news reports, has been very critical of Governor Shapiro. Who knows what's afoot there? But I think it's one thing that to be real, and those are all important factors, and I'm not downplaying them. But let's be really clear: there is a really deep and meaningful division in the Democratic Party right now over Israel, and there are anti-Semitic voices in this Democratic coalition roaming the halls of Congress, and they are going to Chicago in a few weeks, and the last thing they need is a convention melting down over the party's support of Israel. And I think that's impacting, unfortunately, and it's terrible to say, I think that's impacting potentially Governor Shapiro's chances right now. And should that come to bear, that would be really disappointing, but it speaks to where the party's at. Sometimes the loudest, most extreme, divisive voices are the ones that dominate the conversation and the decision-making. But to me, this seems like a no-brainer in terms of putting Governor Shapiro. Do VP picks matter? No, not usually, but it's also helpful to have the exceedingly popular governor barnstorming a state that you need to win. You take Pennsylvania off the map, you take those 19 electoral votes, put them safely in your pocket. You can go spend a lot of time, money, and resources in those other 6 states you need to win.
Yeah, I think you're right, both about the liability and why Democrats are making noise. The loudest part of the party does not want a pro-Israel candidate on this ticket. But look, he's popular in Pennsylvania because he's good. Some of the attacks, the oppos all getting dumped on him at the same time to sort of dissuade the Harris campaign from picking him. And I would say, by the way, the number one sign to me if Harris picked him is they're playing to win. They're playing to win, and they're going to tell the loudest and most often violent, by the way, part of their party to pipe down, and that they're not listening to them on this, which I think gives you both a play for Pennsylvania and a bit of a Sister Souljah moment where you tell your loud and sometimes hateful wing of the party, you're not tolerating this. I think that would be helpful. But also, Shapiro's good, partly because he has had some unorthodox views for a Democratic politician. He has been at least lukewarm to problematic for the teachers' unions and unions in general on school choice. He has been a little bit more critical of COVID restrictions than other Democrats. And on Israel, he's been pro-Israel, right? So these are positions that make normie Pennsylvanians go, oh, I guess he kind of might get me. And that would be important for this ticket. What do you think of a Walz? Because I don't know a ton about him outside of the way the state of Minnesota has been governed. But I've caught a bit of his TV personality in the past little bit when he's auditioning out there with everybody else. And he's pretty decent in that setting.
Well, you hit on a really important point, Mary Katharine, which is if Vice President Harris picks Governor Shapiro, it will be seen as done out of a position of strength, not weakness. And if she picks, and she's willing to take that risk, she's willing to engage the loudest voices in her party. If she picks someone that's backed by Bernie Sanders, socialist, because of some sort of fear on her left flank, will be perceived as someone still working hard to stitch up the undoing of her party recent days. So, I couldn't pick Tim Walz out of a lineup, if I'm being honest with you. Not that my vote really matters, but to add him to the ticket just seems to not give you the boost you needed. And it just, to me, that would lead to more questions about why Governor Shapiro wasn't picked. Right. Minnesota, the Trump campaign has made noise in recent years about putting it into play. I think that's a real stretch under the best of circumstances, just given its political makeup. So if you pick the guy that Bernie Sanders is telling you to pick, that sends a pretty clear message to independent voters who may be tuning in post Labor Day and trying to make up their mind.
Well, and that part of gauging all of this too by people who are deeply engaged in politics is trying to figure out what, as you noted, normal voters are paying attention to at this point and how much of this will matter. I always joke that I am not normal by any stretch because I'm paying attention to all of this, but I am normie adjacent, which means I drive a normal car and live in a normal neighborhood and have friends who do not pay attention to all of this. So I often sort of use them as my focus group. And they're sort of skating through July and August, dealing with a lot of vacations and trying not to get caught up in this. So it will be interesting how things switch after Labor Day. We'll be back with our third segment in just a second. Welcome back to Perino On Politics. I'm here with Colin Reed. One thing we always do on this show that Dana always asks is, what are we missing? What are we not talking enough about in this race? And there's certainly plenty out there.
I don't know that it's not being discussed enough, because it is, but I think the focus of it does not meet the level in terms of just some of these positions that Vice President Harris took in 2019 and before are just so far out there for someone seeking a national office. Green New Deal that would end the energy industry, a ban on fracking, ending private health insurance, decriminalizing making illegal immigration, just walking away from that completely in terms of enforcement mechanisms there. And these are things that she was kind of like accepting as though she were adding toppings on her sandwich. It was just like, pile it on. Yeah, I'll take the extra onions. And now she's got to walk away from some of these issues because they are so just extreme. And look, California has become, not just for Republicans, but for a population in general, if you believe in demographic changes, who are leaving and fleeing to greener pastures. I know Chevron moved to Texas for a reason. That wasn't by accident on Friday. And Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris, is a California dyed-in-the-wool San Francisco liberal. And you saw the Trump campaign start to prosecute that message a bit a couple weeks ago. It's gotten buried underneath a series of unhelpful events since then. But that's a message that can stick. That's a message that always did work for Republicans for a while. And I think it's one that could come back into play should the Trump campaign decide to focus their full attention on it.
Now, I think San Francisco, California liberal is well-worn territory for a reason for Republicans, because it does land with voters. Now, I think you're right. We're not talking about it enough because the press at large does not want to talk about it. And she's on record not just backing each of these policies, including, by the way, one of my favorites, health insurance on your dime for illegal immigrants, which is a fun one. She's also on record saying over and over again that she does want to export California's model to the rest of the country. When she was a California politician, that was explicitly her desire. I think a lot of people look at California and go, yeah, I'd love to visit the national parks. And then I'm going back home where we do not have this model that doesn't work for me. So I think you're right that we're not talking about that stuff enough, and that she needs to be off script, defending it extemporaneously. It's not her strength, but she's running to be the president of the United States, and she needs to be able to answer questions about this stuff.
Yeah, and every campaign, the true test of any campaign is when there are mountains and valleys, there are ups and downs, but any campaign's its true test is when it is down and when it goes through a rough patch, and it will, because it can't go on like this forever. It's untenable to go 91 days without telling the public who you are and what you believe, and whether the positions you took 3 or 4 years ago are the ones you still hold today, not to mention answering for your role in the Biden administration as on issues like immigration and other things where she was given this outsized importance. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is we get lost in this because it's more interesting to talk about the race ahead of us is who's running the country right now. We got a lot of issues, and we haven't seen a whole lot of the guy in charge, and he's there whether anyone likes it or not for the other almost 5 months. So that's concerning, and I think it should be. And what role Joe Biden plays, not only in the campaign, because that's going to be interesting to watch, given that he was essentially frog marched out of the Oval Office against his will by his own party and replaced with the person that he was on record saying didn't think was up for the job, but also who's making these decisions right now, because there's a lot of time to go between August 5th and January 20th. So that I think it should be concerning to everyone, no matter what you believe, because there's a lot going on.
That's another thing I wish reporters were just a little more curious about, is whatever power sharing agreement is happening right now, because I do not think that he's fully up to doing the job in the way that he needs to, which is why he moved out of the campaign, but has not moved out of the presidency. So we'll see. This campaign season has been nothing if not unpredictable. So anything can happen. Thank you, Colin Reed, for being on Perino On Politics. Where can we find you online?
You can I read my Fox columns at, I think that's probably the best place to go, foxnews.com. Just find my latest writings there.
I'm at MK Hammer on Twitter, and you can find my little podcast, Getting Hammered, anywhere you listen to podcasts. Thank you so much, Colin Reed, for being with us on Perino On Politics.
Thank you.
Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.